Lauren cinched her belt at the waist and turned up the collar on her black Burberry coat as she stepped out into the brisk night air. Smartphone in hand, she pressed the go button on the Savoir Faire rideshare app she recently downloaded at the behest of her friends. This new app gave her the choice of using the driverless option, and it being late at night, she thought it would be safer than sharing a car with a complete stranger. She had never taken a driverless ride before, but she was eager to give it a try, since a few of her acquaintances had readily sang its praises. Her friends had decided to remain at the party, but Lauren had to work in the morning, so 1 a.m. was her limit. She had to be up at 7, which meant she wasn't going to get enough sleep as it was, but some sleep was better than none. So there she was, standing outside on a chilly late October night, thinking about how she needed to reevaluate her life's decisions. She stood in front of the house watching the map on her app, track the path of the black sedan that was to be her ride. She arched a brow as the sleek late-model car turned the corner and slowed as it approached her on the sidewalk. She slowly walked over to the car and attempted to peek in the driver's side window, but the dark tinting made it nearly impossible to see anything inside. "Hello?" she shouted, before realizing the absurdity of the gesture. She heard the thud of the doors unlocking as she walked over to the back driver's side door and pulled the handle. It opened easily in her hand and she looked inside. The pristine interior smelled faintly of a mix of leather conditioner and hard liquor, the former most likely from the company that owned the vehicle, the latter, she guessed, from its previous and fairly recent occupant. Lauren hesitated for a moment. She looked back at the house, then at the car again. Was this really the best night to take her maiden voyage in a driverless rideshare? It was dark, and the neighborhood was fairly unfamiliar to her. Maybe she should just call her sister Rebecca again like she was originally going to. She had tried her earlier, but got no answer, and figured she and her husband were still out celebrating their 3-year wedding anniversary. Lauren took a deep breath and slowly slid onto the smooth leather interior. Heated seats, she found herself saying out loud. Nice. She closed the door and waited. Just then the tablet embedded behind the driver's seat in front of her lit up and prompted her, asking if all passengers were inside the car. She touched the yes button, and with that the car doors locked, and the car slowly pulled away from the curb. Lauren's apprehension lessened as the car drove on. The stiffness she felt in her body relaxed as the car slowed to a halt at various stop signs, and even paused to give the right-of-way to a cat passing in the street. Feeling comfortable, she started fumbling through her phone, answering text messages and scrolling through various social media posts. 20 minutes had passed before Lauren looked up again, realizing she was nowhere close to home. She recognized the neighborhood, but it wasn't hers. "Hey," she yelled, startled, and at no one in particular. "Where are you going?" Lauren immediately pressed stop on the tablet in front of her to no avail. "Hey, come on," she shouted, blindly pressing all the buttons on the screen. None of them triggered a response, and the device suddenly went dark. "What the hell? Where's this thing going?" Her exasperated cries went unanswered as the car started to slow down before coming to a complete halt, right in front of Rebecca's house. "You kidding me? I didn't ask you to take me here. My place is like 5 miles away." The car's engine died, and the clink of the doors unlocking stunned Lauren in silent disbelief. She frantically pulled up the Savoir Faire app on her phone, trying to reroute her trip, having about as much luck as she did with the tablet. "Damn it!" an exasperated Lauren yelled finally as she opened the car door, leapt out, and slammed it behind her. "Why the hell did it bring me here?" Frustrated and tired, she calmed down long enough to remember she had a key to her sister's house, and figured instead of fighting with them tonight, she'd take it up with the company's corporate office in the morning. Lauren trudged up the steps while fumbling with her keys, searching for the right one. She was silently cursing herself for staying out late on a work night. She should have known something like this would happen, and add to that the insult of naively trusting a driverless car to operate as it should. Technology was rapidly advancing, but obviously there were still a lot of bugs to be worked out. She was just glad the car stopped somewhere safe. Who knows where it could have decided to drop her off? At least fate seemed kind enough to leave her somewhere she was familiar with. Finding the keys, she opened the door and hastily looked back toward the car. It was still sitting there, as though silently watching her, mocking her for her stupidity. "They better not even think about charging me if this car stays here all night." Once inside, Lauren removed her heels and quietly sat them in the corner by the door. She tiptoed into the house, cognizant of the fact that her sister and her husband were sleeping nearby. As she made it down the hallway, She started to feel a bit dizzy, most likely from her lack of sleep and the 2 bottles of beer she downed at the party she knew she would regret attending in the morning. She made her way to the bathroom to find something for her new and rapidly intensifying headache. She found a container of aspirin, but in her haste to retrieve it, she initiated an avalanche of bottles that repelled comically to the tiled floor. The racket it made not only exaggerated her already splitting headache, but also surely woke the other occupants of the house. She cursed herself and waited for Rebecca, or her husband Tyler, to come running in a frightened start. She waited, but no one came. She was sure she saw her sister's car in the driveway, and Rebecca was a notoriously light sleeper. When they were little, she used to wake up to errant flies buzzing around their bedroom. She would make Lauren's life miserable, unless and until the offending insect was removed from the room, as she claimed she couldn't sleep with the irritating noise. Lauren chuckled. She hadn't thought about that in a long time. She never bought her big sister's claims for a second, though. But whatever, she thought as she rolled her eyes. Lauren stumbled down the hall, not really understanding why she was suddenly so lightheaded. There was no way the 2 beers she had could do this much damage, and so suddenly. Were they spiked with something? This was the last thing she needed right now. She stood in front of Rebecca's bedroom door and knocked. "Rebecca?" she asked, surely loud enough for her to hear. Nothing. She knocked louder this time, still with no response. Lauren opened the door and peeked inside. The room was dark, but she was able to make out 2 figures lying on the bed. She walked over and shook Rebecca. Her body was warm, but limp beneath her hands. "Rebecca!" she yelled, still trying desperately to shake her sister awake. She moved over and did the same to Tyler with no response. Lauren's head was pounding now. She was becoming increasingly faint, and just the effort of breathing seemed to take everything she had. This was definitely more than some pitiful hangover. There was something wrong in the house. Thinking quickly, she stumbled over to the bedroom window and flung it open. The cool night air blew in, and Lauren was briefly able to breathe again. Then it hit her. Lauren threw open all the bedroom windows and turned off the thermostat. She then ran through the house, opening all the doors leading to the outside, and as many windows as she could reach. She ran back to her sister's bedroom and pulled Rebecca from the bed onto the floor. With all her strength, she dragged her out of the bedroom into the hallway and out the front door. The incoherent mumbles coming from her sister reassured her that her instinct was correct. She laid her on the front lawn and shook her as Rebecca's eyes faintly opened. Lauren could see her sister was finally starting to come around. With her sister safe, she now had to figure out how to get Tyler out of the house by herself. Luckily, by the time she made it back to the bedroom, Tyler was conscious, although not fully awake. She sprinted over to his side of the bed and sat him up. His glazed eyes were half open, and he looked confused. "Tyler, come on! We have to go! Can you walk?" Lauren kneeled next to him onto the mattress to gain traction and draped his left arm around her neck. She did her best to stand him up. Pulling as hard as she could, she was able to get them both to their feet. Tyler was able to stagger with her out of the house, and Lauren sat him down on the lawn next to Rebecca, who was awake and coherent now. "What's going on? What happened?" Rebecca said, rubbing the sides of her head. "I feel sick." Lauren grabbed her cell phone and called 911. When the police and ambulance arrived, they confirmed what Lauren suspected. Rebecca and Tyler had been victims of carbon monoxide poisoning, most likely due to their old and rapidly deteriorating furnace. Tyler had removed their one and only detector when it started beeping, because it needed replacing. He had bought the new one, but he never got around to installing it. The paramedics loaded both Rebecca and Tyler into the ambulance for further evaluation at the local hospital. Both were sitting up and talking, and were likely to make a full recovery. As Lauren stepped up to hop into the back of the ambulance with her sister, she noticed the Savoie Fair car still sitting next to the curb. Lauren was entranced by the vehicle as she thought about the catastrophic turn of events that night. Was it a coincidence that the car brought her exactly where she needed to be? If it hadn't, she may have lost her sister and brother-in-law. Did it somehow know? No! How would that even be possible? She thought, as she shook her head and stepped fully into the ambulance. She grunted and let the thought disappear from her mind. The bay doors closed as Lauren gazed through the windows at the car that saved her sister's life. She was suddenly thankful for the imperfect technology, the late-night party, the timing of her arrival at her sister's house. Everything. If everything hadn't gone exactly as it did, things may have turned out very differently that night. All of her anger and frustration from earlier morphed into overwhelming gratitude. She smiled in the car's direction. At that same moment, the car's headlights flashed, and the engine roared back to life. It paused for a moment, as though silently accepting her thank you before switching gears into drive. She could have sworn she heard the car doors lock as it sped off and into the night.